All right, so good evening again, and I'm so happy to be here. I'm hoping that we can take away from the little that we have to share. So, the topic that I've been given to speak about is essentially about indigenous cultures connection to land. And I was happy to really be given this because I think throughout my life, at the point where I became more culturally conscious, I would say that it is something that I've been really trying to share with the community around me, with the people around me, and more so using the tool of social media to do so. But I'm happy that I can use this platform, and thanks to the APA that they are giving us this space as young people and also as youthful leaders to really speak about what this represents for us. So I said that I am from Kako Village. And let me see if anybody has ever been to Upper Mazaruni. Great. So I see a few hands that would travel to Upper Mazaruni. So Kako is found in Upper Mazaruni. It would be the extreme west of Guyana. I tend to consider my village the gateway to Bongoraima because it's in that direction. All right, so I want to share with you a story growing up. Many people ask, what was your childhood like, growing up in the hinterland, whether if it's for Heritage Month or whatever the season is, they tend to ask, what was life like growing up in the hinterland? And I think to share briefly that experience, it would really capture what indigenous lands and what our connections to it really means. So one of the common activities that we've done growing up in school back in Kako, we have the August holidays. Some of you may have traveled outside the country, but for us, we travel up the river. It is our main means of August holidays. My grandfather, my grandmother, even my dad, my parents, they would take us up the river and up the Kako River. Our village is named right after the river, by the way. And so we would spend perhaps like about 2 to 3 days. We camp along the river, and so that was like something we expected. And this is leaving from the main village, from Kako village. Many indigenous villages you go, they have the central village, but I can assure you, like for the Akawayo people, they always have other distant homes, that other distant areas. But I remember this one experience when my grandmother, she was on a trip, and so we went way up to the Kakode, the headwaters, and we went to the river to take a bait. And then she was like, "Son, you need to repeat this after me, right?" And she was basically doing like us, and calling the name of a bird. So there I am wondering what is that? What is it that she's really doing? And she's to tell me that it's a means of protection. It's a means of protection. And she's calling this particular bird because this bird can really, I would say, dominate over the aquatic beasts like the snakes and the water spirits and so forth. And so I never really thought much about it, but reflecting back, it really helps me understand indigenous connections to land. My grandfather, on the other hand, uses what you call a wood sap called warawa. He lights the fire, smokes. It also protects us from the forest spirits and so forth. What I am trying to tell you here is that the indigenous conception of land, which thankfully the president also would have already shared, and I still want to reiterate that because it's very important in understanding what land really means for indigenous peoples. And there is a very, very clear distinction, all right? A very, very clear distinction between the meaning and the conception of land for Guyanese that lives here on the coast, as opposed to indigenous people. I'm mostly speaking for the Akawayo. And so the land for us, it represents the waters. The land for us represents the forest and everything that dwells in the forest. So it's not just the earth. It's everything in its totality is what is land for indigenous people. So when we speak about land, we do not confine it to just what we're walking on, all right? So that is one thing that I wanted to share, but also that for us, our culture is heavily embedded in the same conception of land. It is very complex, but at least I want you to remember that these very elements of nature, of land, of the forest, of water, is what really distinguishes indigenous conception of land and how that shapes our culture. And there are two things following from that that I want to share is that land really defines our identity. That's the first thing I want you to take away. As an Akawayo person, land defines my identity. So what do I mean by that? And I've shared this also on my page many often that I go by the name of Kapong on Facebook, and they say, "What does this mean?" Right? What does Kapong mean? Kapong is like my indigenous identity, but also it links me to a specific area as a person that speaks a specific language. And so when I go to Kako, I hear we call ourselves Kahorgoks, you know. I see I'm not seeing anybody from except for ex Toshao from Camarang, but we distinguish ourselves also by our rivers that we occupy, and that is very very important to us. So the idea of land and where we live also defines who we are as indigenous people. It really gives us that specific distinction of who I am as a Kapong indigenous person. The second point I want to share with you all tonight is that our practices, basically, what we do on our daily basis, is it's I would say interlinked to our conception of land. And there are so many stories and experiences that I can share, but again, let me say this: that growing up, you look at the mountains, you look at maybe savannas, and you wonder how long have you been living in this area? How long have I been here? How long have my ancestors been here? And the beautiful thing about that is knowing when I can ask my grandmother what those areas are, or where is she headed to, or where is she gonna go and fish, and she can tell me where exactly she's going, where she can tell me where exactly my ancestors live, or our foreparents lived, and where did they farm. And many times, if you're Guyanese, you would know that we have this idea of titled and untitled lands. But many times these areas are really outside of what defines Kako. And so Granny, how is it that we now live back here? So because of school and because of education, but historically, the fact that we were able to live even just outside of that small village, but then exactly can tell you where those areas are, it tells me that our history as a people, how we lived, how we occupy these areas, they know this pretty well. And I'm really proud to know that they can be able to share that with us. So it's part of our history. And secondly, it also is part of our daily life. And I want to use again my own experience about this. I remember again my father going down to the river, to the Kako River. It rained the night before, and my father would say, "Oh, the water has raised maybe a couple millimeters. I'm gonna go to this creek and do some fish traps." So now there I am wondering, and he's going to a particular stream, you know, particular tributary, and he knows where he's going. So I used to wonder, how is it that you know that you got to go here? Why this specific creek? But this, I would say, prolonged knowledge that he has been passed down. So they know, and this is why I also said that indigenous people and their knowledge of the land, being they're very observant, they have this unwritten knowledge because they know the land, they know the area, they know the waters. And he would go and he would do what he has to do, And luckily, he has a whole bucket of fishes. And so, because he knew that was the creek that he needed to go to, if he had gone to any other one, it would have, what we say is blows, nothing. He not going to get nothing. All right. So I'm again sharing that to tell you that indigenous cultures are very much intertwined with the rhythms of nature, with the knowledge of the land, that sometimes only for you to understand, you really got to live with us. And so I'm now making an invitation. You want to understand indigenous cultures, indigenous knowledge of the land, you're free to come spend some time. And I think then you would really truly appreciate what indigenous lands and what it means for our culture. And the last point I want to make is that, which I'm really a strong advocate for, is language. Indigenous language is place based. And so if you are to remove me, I am in Georgetown, growing up in school. To remove me from there is literally removing me from my language. And that is a key part of our culture. So sometimes I'm here, and when I say Kawinigida Konaipak, it means I'm going up the river to fish. It has no relevance in here in the city, because why do I use that? And so more and more, the longer I live, so many of the phrases, so many of the stories becomes irrelevant because I'm not in that area. And so for language, which is a key component of our culture, for that to survive, for that to preserve, you have to protect indigenous territories. You have to protect indigenous lands, because there is where it's going to survive. There is where it's going to be resilient, and there is where it's going to grow. And if we cannot understand that, then we just really do not know what we're doing. So I wanted to make that last point on as it relates to our culture and relations to our land. So I want to leave you with this, to say that because I found myself here many times and people ask like why we want so much land or why we complain so much. I want to leave you with this thought that I wrote on my way to here, that when we degrade the lands, we are threatening indigenous cultures. And when we limit our conception of land, or when we maintain a single view of land, we will continue to exclude indigenous people's perspective from the conversation. All right? That's what I want to leave. And also that when we call for the protection of indigenous lands, and we call for the protection, we are also calling for the protection and continuity of our culture. So Tangi, Yerawa Kesa Kombok, thank you for listening to me. Thank you.